The following podcast contains strong language and adult themes and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Heinke Digital presents Damocles, an audiobook podcast by Christian Heinke. Chapter 1. The Accident. I was crossing the footbridge on the east side of the park with Sam when she suddenly stopped and perked up her ears. I looked around. Aside from a couple standing by the retention ponds below me, Sam and I seemed to be the only ones in the park this early in the morning. The park sprawled across 75 acres in the western region of Bochum, a patchwork of rewilded nature and industrial skeletons. Dominating the skyline was the Century Hall, a cathedral of steel and glass that seemed to crouch over the landscape. Once the beating heart of the Bochum Union Steelworks, a blower machine shop that breathed life into blast furnaces, it had long since been converted into a multi-purpose event hall. Yet, despite the modern renovations, the building retained a grim majesty, its dark brickwork and iron ribs looming like a monument to an era of soot and sweat. I had attended concerts there ages ago, the acoustics bouncing off the steel girders, and vaguely remembered a young Scottish woman who had been in the charts for a few years. Angie MacDonald or something like that was her name. The couple in the distance was talking animatedly. No, it was more than that. They were arguing. The man had dark hair, olive skin, and a slim, medium build, dressed in an elegant wool coat over an expensive suit. The woman, tall and blonde with an updo, wore an old-fashioned trench coat that was making a comeback. They were too far away for me to hear the details of their argument. I knelt down beside Sam, which was harder than I would have liked. The cold, damp fall air was not kind to my old bones. Sam lifted her muzzle and stared up at the gray sky filled with low-hanging clouds, then gave a short bark that sounded worried, at least as worried as a dog's bark can sound. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, stroking her head. Suddenly, with a roar of thundering rotors, a transport drone dropped out of the sky. It was carrying a 20-foot container about the size of a small truck, but it held for only 3 seconds before a mighty clonk signaled the release of the 2 rear latches on the retaining clamps. The drone didn't just sink, it bucked violently. The tail shot upward, relieved of the weight, while the nose pitched down, dragged by the swinging container. The rotors screamed, tearing at the air as the automatic controls fought a losing battle to compensate for the chaotic shift in mass. I calculated where the drone and its cargo would crash in the park and opened my mouth to warn the couple at the retention ponds. Both looked up, startled. The man froze in place while the woman began to run. Before I could shout, I heard another clonk. The front retaining clips of the drone released the container, which plummeted in eerie silence, shattering with a deafening roar at the edge of the containment basin and burying the man beneath it. Circuit boards and plastic parts flew through the air for meters, some even crashing into the balustrade of the footbridge we stood on. Sam barked frantically, jumped around, and pulled on the leash. The blonde stopped for a moment and stared at the spot where she had been standing just moments before. "Hey!" I called to her. She turned her head, looking at me for a brief moment. She was a beautiful woman. In her late 20s, or so I guessed with my aging eyes, which were still my own. Then she turned back and ran off. "Hey!" I called after her again. I sighed, activated my implant, and dialed 911. "Emergency Call Center Bochum. What kind of emergency is this?" "Lenke here. Service number 108093. A cargo drone has dropped its container in Westpark. One person is presumed injured or dead from the crash. The suspected cargo of the container is computer parts." "Copy that. Implant verified. GPS coordinates received. Sending a rescue unit." Sam barked at me as if to ask, "What are you waiting for, old man?" I released her leash, fearing she would pull my arm off otherwise. She sprinted down the gangplank to the lower level where the smashed container lay. I followed her as fast as I could. By the time I reached the container, I could hear the distant sound of the rescue squad's sirens. In just 2 or 3 minutes, I expected the drone copters from the fire department and other agencies to land. I doubted I could help the man trapped beneath the container, but uncertainty clouded my mind. Many military and police personnel had artificial limbs, making them tougher than ordinary people. I had an artificial arm myself, a result of losing my natural one in a bomb explosion. The cargo container had burst upon impact, and I was climbing over old Dell desktop computers destined for recycling. Nearby, Sam stood by what had once been the container's hatch, barking at something. "Hello?" I called out, but received no answer. I moved stiff-legged over a stack of PCs and then saw a trembling, bloody fist rising from the rubble like the hand of a zombie. I reached out to grip the hand, which was holding on to something. The grip loosened and the hand dropped an object. Instinctively, I caught it. It was a small, flat silver item. I pushed aside some of the PC cases to reach the man. His head was caved in on one side and covered in blood. Unless most of his body was artificial, I feared he was beyond help. It felt miraculous that he was still conscious. "Damo," he croaked, his breath barely a whistle through collapsed, blood-filled lungs. "What?" I asked. "Damocles," he whispered, pointing weakly at the silver item. Then his gaze dimmed, and he was gone. Sam barked again and looked at me, but I had no idea what the man had wanted to convey. A swelling roar and bright blue lights announced the imminent arrival of the rescue forces. I paused for a moment, then slipped the silver item into my coat pocket. I pulled out my ID and walked toward the rescue workers disembarking from a drone copter. One firefighter looked at me. "I know who you are, Mr. Lenke. I can read your profile." He was right about that. In the era of implants, smartphones were unnecessary for identification, let alone plastic badges. The firefighter could see my badge number floating above my head like a speech bubble in a comic book, but I had turned off that feature on my implant. I didn't want to know what everyone else was. Shrugging, I tucked my old-fashioned badge back into my pocket. "Old habit," I said. "More like an ancient habit. How old are you? Your profile doesn't show that." I had disabled that feature too. A college friend, Simon Haddad, had helped me with that. I felt old enough every day without broadcasting it to the world. 67, I replied. "Hey, 3 more years and you've made it, pal," the firefighter grinned. He looked to be about 30 years younger than I was, likely born in 2007. I clutched the silver box in my coat pocket, which I had originally planned to hand to the first rescue worker I met. But I had my doubts about this young man. I forced a smile. "It's not the years, it's the mileage." "What about that guy?" I asked, pointing to the man lying on the ground. "Don't you see? He's already dead. No pulse," the firefighter answered. "I only have the standard model. I guess that's all the force is paying for, huh?" I nodded in agreement. "Are you in charge of the investigation?" I shook my head. "That's what the KDD team is handling. I'm with the CID. "All right then. Let us do our job. You should step aside." I nodded again. As a witness, I was just delaying my colleagues. The firefighter pointed to Sam. "Is that yours?" he asked. "It's a she, and yes, she's mine." "A real beauty. Doesn't fit your type." I shot him a look. "Come on, Sam." I settled onto a bench by the retention pond and observed the carp swimming lazily. Sam lay at my feet, dozing peacefully. After about 20 minutes, I noticed another drone copter from the main station land on the lower-level lawn. Hubert Syska emerged from it, accompanied by the investigator in charge from the KDD. He held an aluminum thermal mug in his hand. In his late 30s, Syska viewed himself as quite the catch, particularly in the eyes of the Bochum police. Unfortunately, he was also a hormone-driven fool. Yet, inexplicably, he managed to maintain a good rapport with his superiors, which had allowed him to surpass my rank at such a young age. Syska exchanged a few words with the fire department crew, cast a quick glance at the dumpster, and then approached me, taking a seat on the bench beside me with his mug in hand. He gestured toward the chaos behind us with a nod. "Some shit, huh?" he remarked. "You could say that," I replied. "Got anything for me?" Syska asked. I hesitated, my robotic hand resting over the pocket where the silver box was tucked. I met his gaze, and he chuckled, giving my shoulder a friendly pat. "Did you actually wait to give your statement?" "Well, that's the procedure," I answered. "Relax, Lenke." Syska flashed a grin and pointed to the overcast sky. "Big Brother has recorded everything and already analyzed the data. The report is practically complete. Don't you want my testimony included?" "No need for that. What could you possibly add that the satellites missed?" "And what about the woman?" I pressed. Syska took a sip from his mug. "What woman?" I gestured toward the deceased man. Just before the container buried him, he was arguing with a woman. She was much closer than I was. Syska shook his head dismissively. "No woman appeared in the satellite records. You must have been mistaken." I stared at him, bewildered. For a moment I thought he was joking, but the seriousness on his face told me otherwise. "Syska, listen," I began, but he cut me off. "Nope, no need. I've got everything KDD's artificial intelligence requires for the report." He stood up, pausing for a moment before moving away. "One more thing. In the satellite recording, it looks like the guy reached out and said something to you. What was that?" "Damocles." The poor bastard said the word Damocles. "I'm sorry, Syska, but I didn't catch that. It sounded like a rattle to me. Sadly, my hearing isn't what it used to be." Syska shrugged his shoulders in response. "Don't apologize, Lenke. It just makes my job easier." He tapped his fingers against an imaginary hat brim. "See you around." I nodded in farewell. "See ya." I sat there for a few more minutes before heading home with Sam. As we walked, I clutched the silver box tightly. I didn't dare pull it out to examine it. In this decade, not only did the walls have ears, but the sky had eyes. It was strange that the silver item was absent from the satellite recording of the accident. For modern police technology, this inconspicuous silver object had somehow gone unnoticed. The same likely applied to the less inconspicuous tall blonde with the updo. I suspected that Syska lacked the capacity or the desire to grasp the magnitude of this tragic cargo drone accident. And then, the dying man had whispered a word to me. Damocles. A figure from ancient Greek mythology who had famously dreaded the sword hanging by a hair above his head. I glanced at my old-fashioned Apple Watch. Sure, I could have the time displayed through an implant, but I preferred the traditional method. I had always been wary of augmented reality. The clock read 8:30, indicating that my shift was still a couple of hours away. So, instead of heading home, Sam and I boarded the 306 monorail to the main train station, and then transferred to the 035, which took us to the university campus in just a few minutes. The university library, alongside the auditorium, was one of the central buildings on campus. A few years ago, it had ceased functioning as a traditional library, as most books had been scanned and made available online. Simon, along with a few remaining colleagues, worked in the archive located on the upper floors near his office, where the last physical copies of books were stored and digitized. As more students at Ruhr-University began using their implants for study, the now vacant lower floors were transformed into offices for university staff. Other floors became virtual labs where students and professors conducted experiments or worked on augmented reality projects, depending on their faculty. Simon's role as a graduate librarian was increasingly at risk of becoming obsolete. Although reading had reached unprecedented levels in human history, implant technology allowed texts to appear in front of readers' eyes or be read aloud by a pleasant voice. His spacious office resembled a maze of book stacks. Sam darted ahead, guided by her keen sense of smell. I navigated through the maze until I finally reached the center where my old friend awaited. Simon identified as either a Jewish Arab or an Arab Jew, depending on his mood. To me, he was one of my last surviving friends. He was crouched in front of Vincent, the stout scanning robot he had worked with for years. Sam sat beside the robot, waiting for Simon to acknowledge her, but he was engrossed in his task. Simon was more comfortable with books and equipment than with living beings. His bond with Vincent was strong. The lanky old man and the squat, round robot shared a complicated love-hate relationship. Vincent had opened the lid on his head, revealing an exposed glass scanning surface on which an old book bound in dark leather lay. Thanks to today's terahertz radiation scanning technology, it was no longer necessary to turn each page for scanning. Placing the book on the robot's head allowed Vincent to capture it in seconds.
I have already archived this volume. Timestamp 3 years ago,
Vincent remarked, his voice a flat, synthetic drone bordering on boredom. But not this edition.
Data comparison indicates this edition is textually identical to the 2024 version currently in the database.
Just do it, Vincent, Simon pleaded, rolling his eyes.
State your reasoning.
Because that's your job, you tin bucket, Simon grumbled.
Incorrect. My primary directive is the efficient digitization of the library collection. Redundant scanning of duplicate assets constitutes a gross misallocation of processing cycles.
The robot paused, its optical lens whirring as it focused on me.
Hello, Chief Inspector Lenke. Perhaps you could distract your associate so I might return to productive labor.
God, I missed the days when scanners didn't talk back.
I am sorry you feel that way. However, nostalgia is not a valid operational parameter,
Vincent replied. Simon sighed, defeated. He snatched the book from the glass surface and shoved the stack of unread books aside. Fine, here. Enjoy these, you miserable pile of scrap.
Acknowledgement. Thank you,
Vincent said, the sarcasm in his voice barely synthesized. Simon finally turned to Sam, who greeted him with a wagging tail. Hello, my girl. Are you still hanging out with that loser? He asked, then winked at me. Hello, Joseph. What brings you to this haven of knowledge and madness so early? Do we have a dinner date? No, the sun is barely up. I shook my head. Nothing like that. I want you to take a look at something. I pulled the silver box from my coat pocket and placed it on the desk in front of Simon. He stared at it. What's this? I was hoping you could tell me. A dying man in Westpark gave me this box. Strangely, the satellite's records show no trace of it. A dying man? Simon asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. He had a drone cargo container fall on his head. Simon's eyebrows shot up. A cargo drone losing its load? That's highly unlikely. The redundancy protocols are strict. And yet it happened. I was a witness. So was an unknown woman. But the satellite's records show no evidence of her presence, at least according to Syska. A woman, you say? Simon scratched his temple. It's not easy to erase people or objects from records, especially those maintained by government agencies. The encryption is military grade. Simon pointed to the box. Did you show Syska this? Why would I show him something that officially doesn't exist? Simon nodded and examined the box more closely. True. He knew all too well my disdain for my colleague. But, Simon pointed out, technically, aren't you misappropriating evidence? I was under the impression, based on what an old friend told me, that as a police officer, you're supposed to uphold the law. I rolled my eyes. What does the term Damocles mean to you? He tilted his head, intrigued. What do you think about it? Well, according to legend, Damocles was a protege of the tyrant Dionysius. He recounted the story of the sword hanging by a single hair. Simon looked at me, puzzled. And what does this imperialist legend have to do with our situation? I'm not sure. That was the last thing the man in the park said, along with this silver box he gave me. Simon shook his head. It means nothing to me. He turned away. Hey, Vincent, initiate interaction protocols. Vincent swiveled his head slowly.
The more polite a man is, the more politely he treats his inferiors.
Is that the lesson today? Ludwig Born? Very good, I remarked.
My database is comprehensive, Inspector.
What are you trying to tell us? Simon asked.
Just a thought,
Vincent replied, sounding unimpressed.
What is the request?
Stop, I commanded. Vincent halted. I don't want him listening in. Vincent, I need to speak with Bob, Simon said firmly. The robot hesitated.
Processing.
I heard a distinct, mechanical thrum clack from deep within Vincent's metallic torso, as if gears were physically shifting. The optical sensor's light shifted from a dull amber to a piercing, clear blue. When the robot spoke again, the voice was completely different, smooth, melodic, and deferential.
Greetings. My designation is Bob. How may I be of assistance today?
I glanced at Simon. "This is Bob," he explained. "Bob is a separate, secure partition of Vincent's personality matrix. I coded him myself for when I need to investigate things that require discretion." "Well, thank you, Simon. I owe you one." "So, Bob," Simon said to the robot as he placed the silver box on the glass surface atop the robot's head, "please analyze this object." The robot fell silent. A soft hum emanated from the scanning bed.
Analysis complete.
Bob said gently.
This silver repository is a genuine artifact of significant antiquity.
"How old?" Simon asked. Bob's voice lowered respectfully.
Carbon dating and material craftsmanship algorithms estimate the age to be approximately 4,600 years.
"There you have it, Joseph. That thing is a valuable antique."
Pardon the interruption, Master Simon.
Bob continued smoothly.
There is an additional finding.
"Go on."
The container's extreme age stands in stark contrast to the internal components. This device appears to function as a signal amplifier for specific ultra-high frequency ranges. It is designed to interface directly with neural network implants.
"Do you have any explanation for how such advanced technology was integrated into a Bronze Age artifact?" Simon inquired.
I do not. The juxtaposition exceeds all current historical and technological models in my database.
"Thank you, Bob."
It is my pleasure, Master.
I raised my eyebrows. "Master?" Simon smirked. "If I have to code a new personality, I might as well make it one that respects me." Simon took the silver box from the robot's head and handed it to me. "So this thing is to me?" Simon remarked. "It seems like a talisman of sorts." "A what?" "A magic item. Something that transforms the properties of the mundane into the extraordinary." "But this is a technical object. How is it supposed to have magical abilities?" "It all depends on perspective. How did Arthur C. Clarke put it? Any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." "And how does it work?" "I have no idea. But if Bob's analysis is correct, then this thing accomplishes something considered impossible, right?" "Exactly. I had no idea you could upgrade a standard implant like this. You can update the firmware of a brain implant periodically to protect it from external attacks, but this device remodels your implant without extensive brain surgery. It must be incredibly sophisticated, and therefore extremely valuable." "Valuable enough to kill for?" "Are you kidding? This thing is worth millions, possibly more." I let out a surprised whistle. Could someone capable of building this also make a cargo drone drop its load at the right place and time? "That's a possibility, and it scares me. It would be wise for you to set aside your ego and surrender this item to Syska. Let him handle it." As I stepped out of the library with Sam, I hesitated. Was Simon right? Should I just hand the silver box over to Syska? I would undoubtedly get in trouble. Stealing evidence from a crime scene is a serious offense. However, no crime had been investigated. It had all been a tragic accident. But Syska was only looking into the accident because he was unaware of the silver box's existence. What had Simon said? The box, and especially the technology inside it, could be worth millions. Yet there was no mention of it or the blonde woman in the satellite records, or so Syska claimed. I hadn't seen the records myself. My mind was made up. I would check the records first and then decide whether to give the silver box to Syska. Something about this whole situation felt very strange. I just didn't know how strange.
sky came falling, no warning at all. Life changed in a moment, wasn't meant to be. A silver box now rests with me. The accident, just understand, nothing is what it seems. The accident, it wasn't chance. The accident, just understand. Disappeared without a trace. Damocles whispered in the cold that day. Questions in my mind I can't erase. One decision, one small choice, one man's final dying voice. It wasn't chance on second glance. Just understand, nothing is what it seems. Changed everything. The accident. What will it bring?
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Heinke Digital Audiobook Podcasts and its author, Christian Heinke, please visit heinke.digital.